Okay. Beginning of the lesson, let's see if we have questions about unit. First topic in unit 5 about language behavior. This is a good opportunity to ask questions before we move forward. We'll begin with the next topics in unit 5. Jot it down in the question you were studying. And your first name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, regarding that question we had 2 classes ago, and it was can a person's variety be modified in the course of their life? And classmate answer regarding lifespan change.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's correct. I answered that regarding age rating.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
No.
No.
No, that's wrong.
Okay.
Because age grading is not changing. Age grading? No, actually that is something we corrected in your reading materials. On page, in the paper by Meyerhoff, page 103, there's table 7.2, where Meyerhoff lists types of change. Let's make sure everybody on that page is the revision of what we already read. But in case somebody missed that lesson, we do it for the benefit of those who missed that lesson. Okay. Page 153. Is everybody there on that page? Yes. Meyerhoff, chapter about change. It's called apparent time and real time. Paper, page. Real time and apparent time, page 159. There. Yeah. Okay. So it says, the table says types of change, and she makes 5 categories. The first category is stability. By definition, that is not change, so it shouldn't be in the list. Stability. Shouldn't be there, because that's not change. Number 2, age rating. We explained that that phenomenon does not constitute change, because whatever age peculiar variation a young age group exhibits is not retained, kept as part of their repertoire as they grow old. So there are some very, very rare cases, very exceptional cases, that have been found, for example, in Glasgow, in which teenagers, middle-class teenagers in Glasgow, had a peculiar pronunciation feature. And when they grew older, they abandoned that. But the next teenage middle-class group did the same. But then they abandoned that feature when they grow old. So the feature that is non-standard is not retain as they grow older, so that doesn't constitute a change. It's simply something that seems to be fashionable for teenagers in that city. And because that is not change, forget about it. And age grading should not be in the biz either, and should not be in a chapter about change either. Unfortunately, it's there. What can we do about it? But
let's repeat the main concept for the benefit of the economists. Leads to the effort to reach the building on a Monday morning.
okay.
So the first one you talked about was stability.
Stability.
And the second one was age grade. About the first one, talking to you, that's why you were not writing about stability. So, what did you say about stability?
Stability, by definition, is not change, because the variance of the variable are distributed across social groups in the same proportion, decade after decade after decade after decade. Neither variant is increasing, or the use of neither variant is increasing.
So let's give a very simple example that hits home. Because it's right here in Argentina. For decades and decades and decades, some Argentinians, believe it or not, they are Argentinians, call buses el micro. And some Argentinians call buses el ómnibus. Ómnibus, right? And that is still in the repertoire of Argentine Spanish. And some Argentinians say a colectivo. What about you? What do you say? What do you call a bus?
Colectivo, sometimes
La cuenta de todo tipo de gente. And where were you born?
in La Pampa.
Ah, qué bonito. Say la Pampa. What do they don't say born?
We don't really have a lot of public transportation. In my city, there are about 4 buses. So we have a lot of influence from Buenos Aires.
You see, this woman is very interesting informant. Did you ever hear Campiano say omnibus?
No. Maybe older generations, and the bus terminal is called Terminal de Omnibuses, but no one uses it in conversation.
Did your parents drive you to school, or did you walk to school when you were in high school or? So you walked. Now, listen. She is showing a number of things. Variation is connected to experience, to the objects of reality. That's why we don't have 30 different nouns for shades of snow. Snow that is dirty, snow that is getting thicker, snow that is not very dense, snow that has become ice. Because it never snows in Cordova. Right? And then you gave us information that is contradictory. Because she said we have a lot of influence from Buenos Aires, and that is true of all Argentine provinces, because mainstream media with the national scope, that can broadcast nationally, influences the local dialects. Not just because that's the only channel they can tune into or the only radio station they can tune into. That's not. You know that availability doesn't strengthen an influence. What is it? Prestige. People imitate what is convenient for them to imitate. However, she said, we also say Bondi. Porteños don't say Bondi. So she says, we experience influence, and at the same time she says that in her own idiolect, she has two options, omnibus and Bondi. My point is, she is unreliable because she has been living in Córdoba for 8 years, so now she doesn't really know where a certain item comes from, right? And when she goes back home, her parents say, who are you? Listen, going back to the adjective stable and the adjective unstable. If for 60, 70 years you see Argentinians have both omnibus, colectivo, micro in the same register, not in slang, then you say, well, this lexical variable is pretty stable, isn't it? We are not seeing one variable gaining ground. Going back to the other concept, age grading, it happens everywhere, even in your own country and your own hometown. And we don't study because it's boring. You, when you were toddlers, believe it or not, now you wear beards, but you were toddlers at some point in history. You said, quiero tutú, and now you say, I want to buy a car. Right? You say, quiero un coche deportivo. But in that alternation, when you had both options, tutú and coche, and you started saying coche more often, of course, you as an individual are not interested. You as a social group, as an age group, you become interested. When an age group has both alternatives and drops tutú, because the classmates in elementary school don't use it. Right? Then, what has happened? The tutú variant of the lexical variable is simply dropped. It falls out of use. But only because that age group got older. The next age group You go to salita de cuatro, salita de cinco, and they use to do. Right? Of course, all these things I know from hearsay that never stepped into salita de cuatro. But they tell me that very small children have that variant. It's a typical of a certain age group. What is typical of a certain age group, we don't study. ¿Para qué? Si ya lo van a dejar de usar, right? So, teenagers might be interesting for their parents because they say a number of things that later on in life they don't use anymore.
Why is it?
Because one wants to be like one's peers.
Yes,
So-
why is it that those peers do the same? Like they all drop with their
Because motivation changes. Let's concentrate on teenagers because, you know, infants, it's always the mother's fault. Mothers use baby talk, so children use baby talk. But for some children, it's just the same to say papa than tata. So, why speak to them in baby talk? I don't want to get into that. Let's talk about teenagers. Why is it, Thomas asks, that teenagers as a group stop saying, oh, namaste? Because they get socialized into wider and wider social circles. Right? That's why I insist that in fifth year you have both hands free and all your mind concentrated on these theoretical issues because they explain life. You cannot have one hand in the thermos flask, another hand in the spoon filling in with yerba de mate, and then your perception and mind concentrating on not getting hurt with boiling water. Why is it that there is language change? And why is it that there is what linguists, who are not us, call age grading, meaning a disease that lasts for a short time, a certain age? Well, human beings communicate driven by goals. Some goals are very practical. For example, you may at some point in life say, popo, popo, and at some point in life may go to the bathroom, please. Right? And some other goals are social goals. To get ahead in life, or to make a transaction, or to be accepted by a group. A new age explanation is, all you need is love. But sociologists speak about the drives, belonging to a certain group. Mostly people who are not self-confident need the representation. Anyway, the point Dr. Martinez was making is, how come that there were not 90 questions at 9:30 a.m.? You're supposed to have read, studied, and asked. Not a need for clarification, but good questions about your own experience. Your biography, your observation of others, and your knowledge of other languages. Let me mention in relation to change, and I will shut up after this. Change is a very important topic. I know that all of you are fascinated with the chapter on ideology. You love that chapter and you know by heart the 6 types. They're labeled for, one nation, one language, ideology. But change is crucial. Some of you choose to sit for a third language proficiency exam because it's so big. Those of you who choose French, notice the singular second person pronoun is tu. Right? Now the plural, vosotros, is vous. How come that vous became singular as well? Vous prenez la voiture. Usted toma el coche. But that's change. It's not that people are seeing double. They address a singular addressee and they speak in the plural. What's that called? Language change. And also in French. How do you say nosotros? Thank you very much. But if nous avons une voiture, nosotros tenemos un auto. Yo estoy con el auto. How come that you can say on se viene ici? ¿En qué quedamos? ¿Es nous o es on?
Some things in our context in Portuguese as well.
That's right. Thank you so much. Let's talk about Portuguese. How do you say yo? And how do you say nosotros? Bueno, ¿en qué quedamos? ¿Cómo vamos a hablar en una tercera persona? A gente A gente canta, tristeza não tem fim. La gente, y resulta que estás hablando de vos. Eso es una disociación, un splitting the subject. No, that is called language change. And in English, they theoretically is the third person plural, right? How come that now it is that and singular? Therefore, languages change, and you should ask yourself, number one, shouldn't I keep learning about not translation, not teaching strategies to make lessons entertaining about the object that you teach or the object that you translate? Keep learning English because it keeps changing. Then, the other thing you need to ask yourself is translating, for those who are translators, it's a question of words. Or a more interesting question that is the emergence of texts driven by the need for communication from an interested party with their own agenda to a target party with their own agenda. Then, those of you who are not translators, nor teachers, nor curious, notice that one thing you will be asked is, what are the forces against change? What are the forces against language change? Any candidates as a force? Since change cannot be stopped, let's say forces that discourage innovation. Any idea? Ideas. That's one. Right.
Well,
Good.
in the book, they had the example of Iceland, that they were geographically isolated, but it was harder to gain influence in
Oh, that is the lack of contact with communities that speak other languages. Okay, now think of a country that you know well. No, not Australia. Argentina. With very extensive borders. Any social factors discouraging innovations? That's right. No, institutions, and publishing companies, and governmental organizations, and, as she said, corporations, commercial companies. Imagine the problem of printing books that don't last 5 years, because you need to reprint them with all the innovations and exotic, extravagant coinages someone started spreading. Imagine the legislation having to print all the laws with the new syntactic structures, or having to teach all the elementary teachers in the entire country that there is no need to say el castellano anymore. They can relax and say el castellano, and no one will criticize them. It's a lot of work. So what do? You simply wait until those teachers get old and retire. That's all. Otherwise, you've got to make interventions to train people. Come on, granddad, don't say septiembre y psicología, granddad. Now we say psicología. You don't need to make the effort to pronounce psicología. You understand? It's a utilitarian common sense. It's not convenient for a number of economic reasons, social reasons, political reasons, to be totally open to any innovation. Otherwise, we would accept what we see in some high schools, in very learned cities like Córdoba. In some high schools, you see posters on classroom walls and on hall walls. Nube con B corta, exento, con un montón de consonantes, X, C, etc. You have some teachers writing esencial with SC. Well, you get some of the personnel at the National University of Córdoba with very serious spelling mistakes. Especially when people are given a pen and they have to write on a form. Why? Because when they use the computer, there's an integrated corrector. So, my point is there anything to be gained in discouraging radical changes? Of course, there's money to be gained. And time, thank you very much. And you need to hire fewer people to do all that job. And of course, as we said, in think of phonological change. Why is why aren't there so many innovations? Or why aren't there more innovations in phonology? There are some innovations, but there could be many more. For example, here in Argentina, like everywhere else in the Spanish-speaking world, people used to say, Shakespeare. Now, people say Shakespeare. So, is that change? Well, all foreign words used to be Spanish, shies, all of them. Not now. On the contrary, we're going in the opposite direction. Why aren't there more phonological innovations?
Because of the media, maybe.
Exactly. Absolutely. 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 Now, what is a condition sine qua non for change? Oh, now you're gonna say, I don't know what sine qua non means, because this is not Latin. This is English 101.
You have to.
A sufficient and necessary condition.
You need to have one form first, a regular or normative form. You need to have change. You don't have change with nothing.
Only one,
No, at least.
that's all. Porque si tienes uno, hay que sobrevive.
First you need to have one form in order to a form stand from that. A new form. Something.
Porque fíjate, no es cierto, porque fíjate lo que pasó con libros electrónicos. That was dropped, and then libros digitales was used. And now that is dropped, and we say ebook. Speaking in Spanish. So, one variant is not necessarily derived from another variant. No. Try again. What is absolutely necessary for change to exist?
Variables, existence of variables.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, that's the right answer. So, congratulations. We need to improve it a little bit because you spell it V-A, but you pronounce it with a diphthong. Como la fruta, la pera. Pear. A variable. Variable. That's it. You need to have variations. If there is no variation, then one alternate actors have settled in Spain, and they star Spanish movies. In the past, there used to be other actors. And it's just actors for some reason. Now, when they hire Ricardo Darín, when they hire Jorge Martinez, when they hire one of Sbaraglia, they play the part of an Argentinian married to a Spanish woman in all the movies. But in previous generations, the actors had to play the part of a Spanish man. So what did they do? They spoke with the peninsular variants. Okay? So, they said things such as la cera, vamos a cenar, etc. Is that variation? Because when they came back to Buenos Aires, they said, la vereda, vamos a cenar. Do you call that variation? Let me make that a rhetorical question, because I don't hear a chorus. No, that's called a job. If you choose certain phonological variants, grammatical variants, lexical variants, because your boss makes you to, that's a job. That's not variation. Variation is what people do without deliberate control of their choices. Most of the times, unconsciously. Most of the time. So here the Cordobeses are very aware that it's not convenient for them to say Ayla, that they should say Asha. But when you ask them, why don't you articulate the final R in all the infinitive verbs? They answer, que lo que? Infinitive verbs. The final R. What you mean? Well, I mean that you say, vamos a caminar y a cruzar la shoulder. My point is, people are not aware that they are not articulating the final R in infinitive verbs. And that, if you hear as social groups sometimes saying caminar, and sometimes caminar, the social group has both options. That is called variation. Not necessarily within an individual, but within a group. As we proved in this classroom, we say this class is heterogeneous. Some people say masita, some people say pan criollo, right? Okay. As a group, we have coexisting options. For example, some people never say remi, they say remis. But that doesn't mean that the other option doesn't exist in the community of Corte. Speech community of the Greek Corte. Anyway, my general point is, you understand your own social life when you study Unit 4 and Unit 5. And you are language experts. Therefore, you should care about language change. And you should go beyond the printed pages and show up for class with significant, well-thought questions. We will always expect from you to put two and two together and reflect upon what you've learned, not just repeat pages from memory. One further thing that is crucial for citizens, and it's important in citizen formation, citizen education, is look for the income pyramid of September 2025 in Argentina. Because you have an obligation to know about Argentina. It's ridiculous for you to be an expert in multicultural London English, which came after the estuary English, and not know the shape of the pyramid today, in which you are and in which your own family is. The income pyramid is not the whole story for social classes, but it has a lot of weight. That is, you may be upper middle class in terms of level of schooling, in terms of neighborhood of residence, instead in terms of other more intangible values. For example, what school you choose for your children. But you may be considered from the point of view of income, upper, lower class. So this information is available. You spend hours on the net or in a social media. Please look it up. Because one question that will be unavoidable, wake up, is social stratification. So you need to know the meaning of stratum and the plural. Stratum. We have a serious problem in Spanish-speaking classes like you, because students see the word language in the new noun phrases that you learn. For example, language variation, language change, standard language. And Spanish-speaking minds think of lengua, claro, lengua. But in Spanish, the translation of social linguistic variation, that's the complete name, is variación sociolingüística. When you see in the material sometimes language variation, you should hear variación lingüística. When you see in print language change, you should hear cambio lingüístico, because language there is a modifier of change. Okay? So when you hear standard language, no es una lengua, ni en francés ni en italiano. You should hear variedad estándar. Standard language is el dialecto. Standard language is la variedad estándar. An old name in Spanish for that was, it's funny when you think of it. But also, teachers in the Spanish section of the school spoke about and taught la norma culta. La norma culta. Now they have dropped culta and they say la norma. And you should know that what they mean is the standard form. So we have decided to make changes in Janet's and Jenny's chat. From now on, we are gonna introduce a change in the PDF file. Sorry, in Janet. Janet Fuller and Jenny Lehman son las autoras del paper que hay que estudiar. Y por supuesto, el resto del mundo angloparlante hablan de standard language ideology. These two young women, of course, didn't coin the term standard language ideology. It was coined by the previous generation of sociologists, particularly by two British sociologists, Leslie and James Gilroy, who published a famous book called Authority in Language. Of course, this is for your teachers, not for you. I'm teaching them. Authority in language, speaking as they did in the UK, a highly hierarchical society. And they showed how ideas about dialects, not French, Italian, Russian, not languages, ideas about dialects. A synonym for dialect. Ay, no tengo ni idea, dice, después de haber recibido 3 meses de clase. Un sinónimo de dialecto. Pero yo te lo acabo de decir hace como 30 minutos estoy hablando. Un sinónimo de dialecto. Variedad. Variedad. Eso está de moda ahora, decir variedad. Okay, guys. Ideas about dialects, which is the same as ideas about varieties, influence perception. And perception influences ideas about social groups. So, coming back to the year 2025, the language with which you will make a living for the rest of your labor career keeps changing. And it changes faster when there are social groups that are not pushed to write or to read because they have jobs where they make manual work. And it changes even faster if there are social groups that are illiterate. It's not that they don't need to read and write, they cannot read and write. Therefore, you may have a laugh and a derisive smile. What's the meaning of derisive? Ya no te pregunto más nada. Derisive. ¿Y por qué no preguntar? Interrumpirme si no entendí. Exactamente, muy bien. Despectivo. When you see an entire secondary school that used to have very good reputation, and the entire secondary school is covered by posters with spelling mistakes. Yo me dice, jaja, y esto de este barrio, por suerte yo pertenezco a este otro barrio. Well, listen, those Argentinians will end up changing Argentine Spanish. Especially if some changes get spread. Suddenly I've remember that we have female representatives in the chamber of, in the lower chambers, diputadas y diputados, whose tweets are crammed with spelling mistakes. You see? You can even get to earn that many millions a month being an ignorant. But the important point is, in London, not just in a tiny town, in London, we have descendants of people from Jamaica, descendants from people from India, descendants from people from Pakistan. In classrooms where now there are Syrians who escaped the 11-year civil war. And now they are considering whether it's really safe to go back to Syria. You have Palestinians. You have Egyptians, Moroccans, and Africans from a dozen different countries who speak a dozen different languages. What do you think is going to happen to London English with that diversity? And that is the diversity you find in the classroom. And what about all those who do not attend school? But they live together or work together. Like a very poor Honduran man who has to work, for example, in the docks at the port. Who does he work with? Chinese man. What does he learn? Chinese English. And he may be in the port of North Carolina, and yet the English he can teach his children is Chinese English, because that's what he acquired. The general point you need to get is that diversity of population, for any reason, immigration, invasion, a war, refugees, and deficiency in schooling spur change. Spur change. Spur. Encourage, drive, push. No. Empuja, estimula, propicia, favorece. Listen, guys. Let's see if I can find one. Your last name?
Goitea.
Una vasca. Sonamos. Quiero un italiano. Tú. Your last name?
Grasso.
Ahí sabes. Signorina Grasso, per favore, dígalo. ¿Por qué cree que los argentinos dicen Colapinto es un capo? Es un capo de la Fórmula 1. Porque nosotros, si no lo son, los hacemos.
Because of the influence of the Italian language.
No. Italian people, not Italian language. And how come that there were Italians here?
Because of the many European immigrants that came to Argentina
When?
after the war.
Which war?
The Second
There were
World War.
two.
Yes.
And when did the largest immigration waves take place in Argentina? Il nonno. When did your nonno come?
I don't remember exactly, but
Espero que no, porque no podés acordarte, porque no estabas ni siquiera en proyecto.
my father told me.
Ahí está. So you don't know exactly? You don't know.
No, but I know he came to Santa Fe. That's,
And the year? Find out.
okay, I will ask my dad.
Pero, ¿por qué tu mamá, si Grasso es tu papá?
My dad. Did I say mother? No.
Ah. Listen, guys. We are convinced that some words are Spanish because we have been saying them all our lives. And then you find out, oops, capo is an Italian word. But we have been using it during our lifetime. How come? Well, Argentina had millions, literally, of people coming from all over Europe, but including Italy.
I remembered Villa General Belgrano that many Germans came to that part of Córdoba.
That's right. Then, listen, there were three major immigration waves. In the late 1800s, then in the interwar period, that is after the First World War. And why then? Well, because they couldn't escape, but they had been suffering famine. And then after the Second World War, that was the last one. But the most important one was in the interwar period. Therefore, the Spanish of Argentina, the Spanish of Buenos Aires, changed dramatically. And there were, at some point in the early 20th century, more foreigners than Argentina-born people in the city of Buenos Aires. That is the best stew That's the best stew for la leche. Therefore, Unit 5 is important to learn about los lazos familia. It's not disconnected from reality. And very soon we will talk about the war in Gaza and the Israeli language policy.
there's no more questions about language change, then we can move quickly to language ideology. Is there any questions about language change?
Make sure that you understand the concepts in the chapter right here in the language ideology. Ventralino. Okay. What's an ideology? It is a set of beliefs that exist in the okay. Not just one belief, not just one idea, and not just an idea that a person holds, right? A set of ideas and beliefs that are interconnected and are socially shared. And we can have something else, right? Ideologies are not universal, but they are cultural. Now, we are going to talk about language ideologies in a minute, but you need to know that ideologies are cognitive in nature, right? They are present in speakers' minds and in the minds of social group. However, they have a discursive dimension, right? They are manifested, they are constructed in text. And in this process, language use. That is why it's so interesting to pay attention to how people use language. Because they influence about the ideas, right, that they uphold. Okay. Of course, there is a two-way relationship between discourse and ideologies. That is to say, discourse manifests these socially shared ideas, but at the same time, they construct, right, socially shared ideas. The important thing is that you may ask yourself, why do we care about ideas? I mean, all of us have ideas, and it's impossible not to have ideas about, well, reality, right? And the language here. The important thing is that these ideas have consequences, right? Very important consequences. Are you going to know what any consequences of having ideas about language use? Discrimination. Let's proceed just for a while, and then, but you know, keep that idea there.
Yes, like some prejudice, some communities use different dialects or varieties of language. That prejudice is I associate it with a negative connotation.
But a bit about connotation, right? But prejudice, okay, prejudice towards what? Exactly.
That, for example, a variety index that you are from lower social classes, and some people may discriminate you for that.
Okay, so you mean that ideas
Yes.
about language used by a particular social group can lead to discrimination in the sense of not choosing somebody to be a potential partner, well, that's but not choosing somebody for a job position, not choosing somebody to fulfill a particular role.
So what do we call that? Making malos means hacer diferencia entre los buenos y los malos. Discriminar entre los que tienen mérito y los que no lo tienen. In English, to discriminate means to make difference, including give different treatment to people who should be treated equally. You see, it's so good that you are asking questions about prejudice and discrimination, because one of the students mentioned the word, the concept stigma some minutes ago, and that means that you need some clarification. Stigma is the social evaluation of a variant. Think of, for example, a phonological variant, the global stop, or the semi-vowel y in yo. Okay. Or the hypercorrection of some English speakers is, instead of athlete, they say athlete. That is the insertion of a schwa. Or a grammatical variant. Si yo tendría plata, me estaría acá. That can be negatively evaluated to such an extent that it becomes stigmatized. Human beings are not stigmatized. The social group is not stigmatized. The variant is stigmatized. And that connects with the weight of ideas about ways of speaking.
So, that's right. And there are many studies that have been conducted about what happens when kids at school that, from their homes, they'll bring non-standard varieties into the education context. And how their academic records are affected by these home vernacular varieties. And how they are charged to be less intelligent, less capable than other school children. So these ideas are important because they shape the way we reason, not only about language, but also about other people. And ideologies can be, right, that is to say, they can be expressed through language. I'm sure you're used to listening to things like, los bolitas hablan por this bill, digo por Argentina, los riojanos pronuncian mal, or los santiagueños hablan bien. So ideas about correctness, how certain ways of speaking are correct, appropriate, based, and other ways of speaking are not. Right? So some of these ideas are expressed, we have to accept that, and openly, without any thought about it. However, the most powerful ideologies are those that are not expressed. Right? Those that are implied.
up, please?
It's so
Can
Can
you
you speak up,
speak up?
Dr. Martinez?
I'm sorry.
Listen to you.
it means that an idea becomes so so common, so natural, it's become simply obvious, so many people don't notice. Simply, well, they say common sense. What is common sense?
Well, common sense relates, of course, it's a social contract, right? There's nothing natural about ideas. Ideas are constructed socially. However, we have to accept that because they are repeated, throughout time, and they are socially shared, at one point they become invisible. But they orient the way in which social groups reason and think about social issues without questioning this assumption. Because it's no longer an idea that is in the foreground, but an idea that is at the background. Naturalization is a process in which certain ideas, right, become maybe at one time they were explicitly stated, but at one time they no longer need to be so because they are considered to be common sense. And usually we don't say things that are obvious. There's no need to say something that is obvious. Now, how are ideas naturalized? We think. How are ideas naturalized? Notice what happens. This is not a chronic itself. This is not a if you're learning to drive a car, you need to pay attention to, okay, now first gear. Then at this speed, I need to switch into second gear. You need to say, okay. And then I have to do something that, you need to pay attention to, you need to notice, and you need to think about it. And sometimes, but the more you drive, the less you need to do that. Why? Because the process has become automatic. Now, what happens with these ideas that are repeated constantly?
Cristina?
They
Cristina?
become automatic, right?
Cornejo and myself cannot hear the answer.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
It doesn't matter. It's better for you not to hear what these guys are saying. The point is that most people in this room already use naturalization. When they speak about other sets of beliefs, for example, beliefs about what a certain gender group can do and where they can do it. Right? They are familiar with the term naturalization and with the concept common sense. That it's beliefs that are not questioned, they are not contested. Particularly because they are established. Established means shared for such a long time and by so many people that you better not go against what is socially approved of. A synonym of socially approved of? Socially sanctioned. Anyway, and the next things get more interesting. and in the English dictionary. After they do that, they should know the difference between hegemony and domination. But they can do that by themselves. These are extremely intelligent young adults. Go ahead, you do whatever you want.
Just, let's see, in Japan, Medina. There you are. Okay. Now, of course, hegemony is a kind, right, of domination. But what you understand by domination? When you think about ideas, right, set of ideas. Notice that we start with something that is easier, right? Domination is something that you can clearly understand.
Like a dominant group impose their ideas over a dominated group.
Okay, right? So we have a group that is powerful, that imposes a set of ideas on powerless group. Okay. Now, what about hegemony? Notice that there are different ways of pronouncing this noun. How is hegemony a particular kind of domination?
I don't know.
Can somebody? Yeah. Okay. Let's. Stefan and Thomas. Sorry.
Is it related to ideas or uses or are commonly or widespreadly shared? Like related to the majority of people in the community.
I don't think it's a matter of numbers of people who share a set of ideas, but yeah. But really, notice what Melina said. When she talked about domination, she said it's a matter of imposing a set of ideas. I agree with you. When there is a hegemony, a set of ideas prevails. That's right. That's right. But when you think about the mechanisms of hegemony, how comes that a set of ideas prevails and there are not opposing set of ideas that challenge this ideological system?
So why do you accept?
But it's why you accept it. But that is a result. How do those ideas come to be why we accept it?
No, pero es que muchas veces no es cuestión de aceptarlo. Muchas veces es que la oposición queda asfixiada. How do you say that? Opposing views are stifled. So in a analyzing power, you may have a block or a group that is dominant and other blocks or groups that are non-dominant, and they coexist within a political system. But a hegemonic block or a political perspective or religious practice practice is hegemonic when there is no room for alternatives, and when they make sure alternatives don't prosper. And like fascism and Nazism, and I can give Argentine examples too. Let's stop there. Let's move on.
So what is to prosper in that sense?
Well, that you have any chance that the bloc or the social group that is non-dominant and challenging the hegemonic bloc has any chance of becoming the dominant bloc. Therefore, in a political system, the essential component is conflict, tension. Those who are dominant want to perpetuate their power and call all the shots. And those who are non-dominant can be multiple groups, not just one, want to become dominant. That's the normal play of political power. Now, a hegemonic exercise of power is making sure that no opponent gains enough weight to be a challenger. So you can, for example, exert hegemonic power in Russia by poisoning Navalny, who was the only leader who had enough followers to ever be a candidate in a presidential election. Or you can push some of the opposing leaders off the balcony from the 7th floor. Oops. Suicide. That's hegemony. Because you still have to work to maintain power. But far from being fair play, you make sure there aren't really any chances for anyone but your supporters. That's why in the very brief term when Putin was not prime minister, he could Medvedev, I'm pronouncing it, I don't know, for a term. But he was a puppet prime minister. The real power was in the hands, it was in Vladimir's hands. That's hegemony. Well, it's not the other one.
Now, I was going to ask you, in Russia, YouTube is banned, but there is a variant, which is called rooted. Is that an example of hegemony? Because they cannot access real things.
That's why you will live a time in which democracy as a type of organization, political organization, is in serious danger. Because you are seeing that in many countries of the world, the access to power, the access to office of a political group is through elections. But once in power, they make sure they concentrate judicial power, legislative power, not just the executive power. And they make sure there are no venues for the expression of dissenting voices. And one way that is a sine qua non condition. A sine qua non condition. What was the meaning of sine qua non? So, just sufficient? Necessary. For democracies to have alternation of political groups and the expression of dissent, even if a non-dominant group never gets to be dominant, but at least expresses dissent. One necessary condition is freedom of the press. That's crucial. And you can distinguish that from freedom of expression. But then you need independent press as much as independent judges, and don't get orders from the executive. And with expression, you have dilemmas. That's why the social expression in social media and variety of social media platforms is something that you should be arguing about, because there are clear cases in which you wish social media were regulated. For example, in cases of cyberbullying or attack on teenage girls, or in the distribution of porn or violence. This week in Argentina. And at the same time, you wish they were not regulated so much that any talk about a president was censored. So you need regulation, but not so much that any talk about an Ayatollah or about Donald resulted in the closure or the bankruptcy of the social media company. You see my point? Though that equilibrium is very delicate, it is being debated all over the world, and unfortunately, few are demanding governments to produce new legislation and legislation that is sensible, sensato. Australia, for example, has just passed of corporation. So if there are some things the Argentine society cannot tolerate. For example, the apology. Apology is not just el perdón, it means apología, elegía, alabanza. The apology of violence. There has to be a limit to that. There has to be restriction. And what about violent language? Can anything be said about anybody? And in addition to violent language, which can go beyond insults, you get flagrant lies. No solo injurias, sino calumnias. Should we let that be a free-for-all, unrestrained, because we invoke freedom of expression? There is a need for new legislation, but some groups need to demand new legislation. If there is no lobby for restraint, no lobby in favor of peaceful coexistence of adversaries, then there will be no interest in governments to go against powerful corporations and tell X, the platform X, there are some things that Argentinians don't tolerate. On the contrary, governments want to be friends with the owners of X. You see my point? It's the civil society that needs to be moved to demand restrictions to them, because there are new and different dangers nowadays. And those dangers are risks to democratic ways of organizing our society. Those are the crucial topics for people your age, for people who will suffer the consequences of the distrust of everything. So you get a video, you get a post on your phone, you don't even know the source, and you believe.
Or if it's real, because nowadays with AI, that's
Me está hablando como si fuese un micrófono.
Language features of variety of languages are associated to social
Fatal, ¿sabes?
Dr. Galina, there's a question.
Okay. Yes, please. Project your voice. Okay. Excuse me.
Carla,
Carla. Yes.
when you mentioned stances as one of the concepts associated with indexicality, is it the same concept that we saw on YouTube?
Of course, we are not referring to stories, right? But you understand this as an outlook, right? An outlook on a particular issue, right? For example, a political stance,
Okay.
a perspective, a viewpoint. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
invisible.
Exactly, exactly. That's right. Now, of course, forget about it. What happens when certain ideas disappear, are made, or they are erased. That's the technical term.
Some other prevail.
Exactly. And as we talked a lot about hegemonic ideas.
Yeah.
How hegemonic ideas
You can naturalize.
maintain their status because competing ideologies are erased. Oh, and of course in the chapter you read about different kinds of language ideologies. One language ideology, which in the reading material is called the standard language ideology, and we're going to change that label for the reasons that were explained before the break. We call it the standard variety ideology. So, Valentino, Anansi, okay. What is the standard variety ideology? Okay, the standard variety is the only, you said valid?
Yes.
Okay.
Am I correct?
Okay, there are ideas of correctness associated to this variety. Now, in the standard language variety, well, notice that there is a bias towards one way of speaking that is thought to be homogeneous, well-defined, okay, right, it's an abstraction, right? And we're also in this system of ideas and beliefs and values. What can you say about the value of the standard?
Correct. That great social status,
Sorry?
that it's associated with a great social status.
Okay. Any other? Right. And my question was about, we mentioned some ideas that are interrelated in the standard variety ideology, and we mentioned ideas of correctness, ideas of the nature of the standard, being, homogeneous, well-defined, but we didn't talk about the values of the standard. Yeah, that's what we know about the standard, that's right. The value of the standard. So if you compare, or you can say that, right? The standard. Sorry, that was, so you mentioned that the value of the standard derives from, or is associated with, the institutions. And what's the function of these institutions? How do they contribute to the value of the standard?
The person is neutral. I think the word.
There's nothing neutral. I'm sorry to there's nothing neutral.
No,
I mean,
there
when we think about this is neutral, I don't know, probably mathematics. But in the social sciences, nothing is neutral. So, and when we're talking about ideologies, and especially the standard variety, there's always a bias towards one variety over others.
Maybe they erase the value, for instance, by one language.
Okay, there is a belief, right? We know that in reality that is not the case. But, so it's associated with the belief that citizens, right, of the nation should speak one language. Why?
Because of the identity in relation to that nation.
And how is the national identity connected to this one language? What is the connection between national identity and one language?
Speakers of that nation.
Not speakers of the nation, speakers of the language.
Language of that nation is related to their identity as.
Right, they are related. The question is how. You're right, you're saying this is related to this, and I said that's perfect. How they are related?
Because they live in that territory, or they live in that territory.
You know, not really. If you think about what is language, what is the function of language for the building of a nation?
As regards their communicative needs.
Not really. You can think about a flag, for example, a national flag. What is the relationship between a national flag and the national identity?
So belonging to the nation.
What?
Okay, is that a relationship? I don't think so. Yes.
Belonging to a nation.
Is belonging to, so speaking one language in the same nation creates a sense of belonging among the people, belonging and also a connection and creating a community. Being
Okay,
part of
that's yeah, you're right, but the idea is you need to refer to the concept of what a symbol is and how a symbol represents something else. Okay, can you make a sentence so that because if it just you tell me one word, I said, okay, how do I connect this with?
This idea of one language, one nation ideology is associated that to believe that people of the country should speak only one language is also associated with or is related to this idea of unity to give the people of the country.
Right, so one language is thought of as a cohesive element in a nation in which all members of the nation are said to share this language. That's right. So language representing a nation. Now in this system of ideas, what is the perceived effect of having multiple languages in a nation?
the opposite of nationalism.
Okay. Can you elaborate? Because you say division and then
Having a nation with linguistic diversity in this ideology is perceived as not being a unified nation.
right, it's thought of as dangerous. Multilingualism in this, or from this perspective, is thought to be something dangerous. And Camila was right. Why dangerous? Well, because it is, again, notice that these are ideas. We're not saying that this is the case. Actually, the opposite is the case, right? These ideas do not hold. But there is this belief that multiple languages will create internal divisions that in turn will, bring disruption and division into a nation. That's right.
Or be perceived as a threat, not necessarily as causing division.
Correct?
But the fact that a potentially competing language exists along the language of the majority or the mainstream choice language can be perceived as a threat to identity. And of course, very few will admit that it can be also perceived as a threat to power. But it's mostly out of ignorance of the benefits of bilingualism, ignorance of the economic advantages of having more than one language in a country, because they are assets, even on the market, that pushes people in general, and particularly the uneducated, to say things like this. Esto es Argentina, ¿cómo es que en este mini mercado barrial todavía siguen hablando coreano entre ellos? Que hablen español, porque seguramente están hablando de mí, right? But it is the perception of threats, identity, threats to control, threats to identity, threats to market hegemony, etc., that leads to rejection. But of course, even groups and families who embrace a trivial and banal form of nationalism should desire the cognitive benefits of bilingualism for their children, in addition to the fact that job prospects are better the more languages their children master. But of course, banal nationalism blinds people. And that's what ideologies are most effective, when there is a clash between evidence-based argumentation and blind adherence to beliefs. As if they were uncontestable truths.
Notice what you see on
Just a
page
second.
66.
Before we move on to other ideologies that are discussed in the figure, I propose we add to your list two concepts. One which was used just a minute ago in the discussion, the concept of symbol, which together with the concept of index or indexicality and the concept of icon are applied in this chapter. I think it's important to keep them in the list as a reminder for students that concepts are used, important concepts are used across different units and in different papers. So you find here also the concept of icon, and the term that denotes the process of turning something into an icon, which is iconization. And it's applied, in this case, to languages, because there is a perception that is shared among groups in certain societies that certain languages have features that resemble the features of the social group that speak that language. So you need to go back to the concept of icon as explained in the first semester. Remember when we talked about how a drawing that represents, for example, the prohibition to light a fire in the hills resembles some aspect of the action. So the drawing consists of some logs that are crossed, a fire, and then a cross denoting don't. That drawing resembles the action of lighting a fire. Okay, that's why we call that relationship between signifier and signified an icon. The sign is an icon. The same is, or something similar happens with languages. When languages are thought to be, or thought to sound sexy, sensual, fun, etc., because the group of people that speak that language are perceived as having those stereotypical characteristics. So that's another ideological process that affects how languages and the social groups associated with those languages are evaluated, perceived in a society.
Okay, just before we move on, notice what you can see on page 66 in the chapter by two different texts, right? Two different bumper stickers that can be seen in the US press. And notice that one says "Welcome to America" and speak English, and another one that contests this idea says "Welcome to America" and speak English. Okay. What do these two texts have in common?
Nobody can hear you. Shout. Protect your voice.
Constanza, what's your surname? Okay.
Even though the second speaker wants to respond to the first one,
Forget about the one response.
okay, yes, it's still part of the one language, one nation ideology, because suppose like it has this underlying message that also the Native Americans spoke one language. It tries to make this distinction that English are actually the colonizers, they were not the first ones in the land, so therefore they are not like the original, let's say, yes, the original languages of the land, so they don't have like the right to ask other people to speak their language, but still, that speaker, they say that, I don't know, they
Go beyond what it said and
Yes,
consider
like
what is the underlying idea in both texts.
they also this idea that the Native Americans spoke one language, where actually there were many tribes in languages and they still talk to each other.
There is the same underlying idea that the discussion is which language should be used. But the idea that remains uncontested is the idea that one language should be chosen. Only one. And none of these texts we have the idea that the two languages can coexist. And the two languages are, equally useful. And they may have the same status. So
up.
15, right?
Yes.
Yes.
The message is also speaking another language.
But then here, both are Cherokee is a Native American language, so it's not that they come to America. They live in America.
You're welcome as long as you speak that language.
Okay, if you think about a different context.
Yeah.
Okay, or if you think about, let's consider Spanish used in the U.S. Okay, there you can see this idea that, but I'm trying to, okay, or I can think about this idea that what a good citizen is like, and one that speaks the official language.
Yes.
And there is another idea related to this connection between nation and language. You know the difference between state and nation, don't you? The idea that if you have one language, you don't have room for another. Therefore, learning a second language would ruin your mother tongue. And if you come to this country, you should learn and use, that is, speak, not just write, our language, and get rid of yours. That is, as if the languages were mutually exclusive. Because I know you have learned English, then in this store, in this shopping mall, or in this company, don't talk to the door person or the maintenance staff, el portero, or the support staff in Spanish. Address them in English, as if there was no room for two. But of course, these are ideas. In the same way, you would be surprised to find exclusionary ideas among the tolerant, that group that supposedly is in favor of receiving immigrants or refugees fleeing war. Still, some ideas are coexist. On the one hand, we should heal the weak and embrace the poor, and then make them exactly the way we are, in everything. Stop cooking smelling foods, stop wearing garments that we wouldn't wear. We have a desertion. Do we have a to get up there? Oh, rush. Oh, it's not a test. It's the competition for resources. Neat. Okay. People are not tuned into the ideology thing. Best of luck with your presentation. As homework,
Just make sure that the next class you answer the questions in the questionnaire that was uploaded to Moodle about Lobianco state. And in addition to that, of course, study the rest of Unit 5 because next time we're going to make fast progress through it.
there are very, very current and contested issues in the remaining papers. For example, should you be talking about the English language or a variety of English from nowhere? It's neutral. It's uncontaminated. Or actually what you see in real life is combination of languages, appropriation of language resources, mixtures, code switching, borrowings, and even chaos. So, is there such a thing as language? This is the end of Spanish, and this is the beginning of Portuguese. Go to the border between Misiones and Brazil, and let me know whether that clear-cut distinction holds.
But I also think that happens here in each province. Like I'm from Santiago del Estero, we speak Spanish, but also
Exactly. And the southeast of Córdoba sounds more Santafesino than anything like San Vicente. Right? Then there are more similarities between groups of Cuyanos and Chilean Spanish. So, what on earth have we been teaching our students? What we have regarding varieties of French in the southwest of France, including Gascon and varieties of Catalan in Catalonia and la Comunidad de Valencia. What do we have? We find a continuum. What makes us believe that they are very different? But no, they tienen nada que ver. Political divisions make us perceive differences where there are more similarities. Now, are political divisions useful? Yes, they are very useful. For example, you get your own country. So you speak something that is very similar to these guys, but you call yourself Norwegian. We have Norway. Palabra más, palabra menos, es igual que el sueco. Y suena igualito que otro país escandinavo, pero cambiaron la ortografía. So is it useful? Of course. that you, as language experts, should know better. That political divisions and historical forces impose borders, frontiers, and make us perceive differences. Therefore, is history important? Absolutely. Is politics and ideas about nation important? Extremely important. There are ideas about nations. Some of those ideas are called nationalism. And that is driving a number of things going on today in your world. Nationalism. It's not just the nationalism of the Basque country or the Catalan leaders that want to be a separate state. It's not just that. It's the nationalism that is being fueled it's being fueled by political factions, by dominant political blocs in power. So every time a government is weak, we say, los chilenos nos quieren quitar la Patagonia. So public opinion is focused on an enemy. Every time a faction in office wants to be liked, they say, las Malvinas son argentinas. And so what? What have you done to make them become Argentina? The issue is all that is not alien to the issues we care about. Languages, the teaching of languages, the spread of varieties, and what variety you choose for translation. The issues in the second half of this unit are macro societal issues that have a direct impact on your profession. Now, what can individuals and families do? A lot. That's why the papers from now on show that, and they say planning can be regulations imposed from el Ministerio de Educación or from la Cámara de Diputados. But families and individuals can follow their own principles and their own convenience. That's why you have families in Argentina who still use English at home. And they have they still, a century later, use the granddad's language. But you have you to go to higher education and climb up the social ladder. Its ideas are reflected in family planning, family planning. Okay, this is the end of the story. And I will not be seeing you again. So I will miss you from a beach.
¿Otra vez?
But I will wish you all the best.
Pero no los demás.
I had a lot of fun.
Me parece que piensa que fue la cosa. Sí, mal. ¿A qué dulce sabe la libertad? Ella cree que le aplaudimos porque por ella. Sí, amiga, obvio. Yo quiero baño, amiga. Voy a olvidar la práctica. Ya me Cecilia que no la ya, pero me ve la playa. Ha habido un montón de información.